June 21, 2025, 12:35 p.m. Eastern Time. Iran issues new grave warning, says U.S. involvement in Israel conflict would be very dangerous for everybody. By Rebecca Schneid, reporter. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned on Saturday that if the U.S. were to get involved in the Israel-Iran conflict, the result would be very, very dangerous for everybody. The tweets, interviews by the U.S. President, it's quite clear that he's talking about the U.S. leadership on these questions of a potential U.S. involvement, Araghchi told reporters. Unfortunately, we have heard that the U.S. may join in this aggression. That would be very unfortunate, and I think that would be very, very dangerous for everybody. Araghchi also claimed that Iran has many indications that the U.S. has been involved in Israel's bombardments of Iran since day one. These remarks come amid uncertainty and debate as to the potential U.S. involvement in the conflict and what that might look like moving forward. Several U.S. Air Force B-2 bombers appeared to have taken off from the Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri in the United States and were headed across the Pacific, according to reporting from the New York Times on Saturday, citing flight tracker data. Military equipment is often moved from one base to another, and it's not always indicative of an impending strike. Time has reached out to the White House for comment and further information. Trump, who has said that the U.S. has not been involved in the Israeli strikes thus far, has given himself 2 weeks to make the decision as to whether the U.S. will strike on Iran. Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks, said Trump, in a statement delivered by the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on Thursday. Leavitt went on to add that, if there's a chance for diplomacy, the president's always going to grab it, but he's not afraid to use strength as well. The U.S. and Iran had long been engaged in talks, in the hope of reaching a nuclear deal. Officials from both countries were set to meet in Oman's capital of Muscat last weekend for the next round of nuclear discussions. But Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi announced that, in light of the Israel-Iran active conflict, those talks would no longer be going ahead. This came after state television reported that Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei called nuclear talks with the U.S. meaningless. While Trump has called for Iran to return to the table, Iranian officials appear to be reluctant. In order for us to come back to diplomacy, the aggression should be stopped, Araghchi said on Saturday. I cannot go to negotiation with the United States when our people are under bombardment, under the support of the United States. Trump has stated multiple times in the first months of his second term that a deal with Iran would have to include a ban on the nation enriching uranium, something that would allow them to produce nuclear weapons. He has also called for something more permanent than a ceasefire. We're looking for better than a ceasefire, Trump told reporters on Air Force One on June 17 as he left the G7 summit. A real end, not a ceasefire. An end, giving up, entirely. Trump later doubled down on his view of what Iran should do via a post on his social media platform, Truth Social, writing, "Unconditional surrender." However, Trump has delivered cryptic responses when asked exactly if and how the U.S. might get involved in the Middle Eastern conflict. On Wednesday, when asked if the U.S. is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities, Trump said, I may do it, I may not do it, nobody knows what I'm going to do, I can tell you this. Iran's got a lot of trouble. They want to negotiate. I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. He later said in the Oval Office, I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change, especially with war. Meanwhile, Araghchi's new warning is the latest in a long line of stern words and threats from Iranian officials in regards to a potential U.S. involvement in the current combat. On Wednesday, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei threatened irreparable damage if the U.S. joins the Israeli conflict. The Americans should know that any U.S. military intervention will undoubtedly be accompanied by irreparable damage, Khamenei said in a televised address. The U.S. entering in this matter war is 100% to its own detriment. The damage it will suffer will be far greater than any harm that Iran may encounter. The Israel-Iran conflict has entered its 9th day and shows no signs of slowing down. Israel's initial strikes on Iran, conducted in the early hours of June 13, targeted multiple nuclear and military sites, amid rising concerns of Iran's nuclear capabilities. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the strikes, part of Operation Rising Lion, would continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei issued a grave warning to the U.S. on Wednesday, telling the country it would suffer irreparable damage if it engages in military action against Iran amid its conflict with Israel. The Americans should know that any U.S. military intervention will undoubtedly be accompanied by irreparable damage, Khamenei said in a televised address. The U.S. entering in this matter war is 100% to its own detriment. The damage it will suffer will be far greater than any harm that Iran may encounter. It was already suspected that the U.S. was involved in the malicious move carried out by the Zionist regime, but considering their recent remarks, this suspicion is growing stronger day by day, Khamenei said. Calling out President Donald Trump directly, the Supreme Leader added, "The U.S. President threatens us. With his absurd rhetoric, he demands that the Iranian people surrender to him. They should make threats against those who are afraid of being threatened. The Iranian nation isn't frightened by such threats." Trump issued a series of cryptic responses following Khamenei's highly publicized address. When asked if the U.S. is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities, Trump offered a non-committal, "I may do it, I may not do it, nobody knows what I'm going to do, I can tell you this. Iran's got a lot of trouble. They want to negotiate. I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction." On the subject of whether he gave Iran an ultimatum, the president said, "You could say so. Maybe you could call it the ultimate ultimatum." Responding to Khamenei's assertion that Iran will never surrender, Trump said, "Good luck to the country," adding that his patience with Iran has already run out, "That's why we're doing what we're doing." He did not elaborate on what he meant by this. Amid the back and forth, Iran's mission to the United Nations in New York said that no Iranian official has ever asked to grovel at the gates of the White House. Israel's initial strikes on Iran, conducted in the early hours of June 13, targeted multiple nuclear and military sites, amid rising concerns of Iran's nuclear capabilities. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the strikes, part of Operation Rising Lion, would continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. Iran followed through on its promise to retaliate, and the rivals have been trading deadly missiles and threats since, with the reported death tolls in both countries rising as a result.